Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's really a great pleasure for me to welcome a longstanding friend, Scott Shay, who is a leading businessman, a thought leader, and author of 3 books that have really made a difference in this world. Scott, in his professional life, is the co-founder and chairman of Signature Bank in New York. But I think more than anything else, Scott in his life is a professional Jewish advocate. Whether it's for Jewish education, where he has done so much, or in the realm of Jewish thought, where his book has really done extraordinary issues, the book In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, and most recently in a book that he just published called Conspiracy U. It is a fascinating read, and the reason why I asked Scott to join us today. Scott, thank you so much for being on Daytime Dialogues.
Rabbi Matanky, thank you for those kind words.
It's really, let me just cut right to the chase about Conspiracy U. Conspiracy U addresses a case study of a university that for us, we're very familiar, Northwestern University in Evanston. It's just a few miles away from Ida Crown, where both Scott and I were students a couple of years ago. And
when the dinosaurs roamed the meadow.
Well, they were only in Pratt. They hadn't made it up to Skokie. And it uses as its case study 2 professors, Arthur Butts, that for those who are longtime Chicagoans, you should be very familiar with him back in '76, when he wrote a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century. He's a Holocaust denier. And also Stephen Thrasher, who's a professor at Medill. My father was a graduate of Medill, and who is on the far left and is anti-Israel, and looking at what happens in universities today through the prism of Northwestern, where Scott is an alum. So just with a couple of opening pieces, Scott, what caused you to write the book?
Well, I started writing what I thought would be a 2,500 word article that I was intending for a Jewish publication commemorating the 75th anniversary of my father's liberation from Dhaka. And around that same time, I noticed, I didn't start, Professor Stephen Thrasher made the front pages here in New York in the general media, because at the doctoral convocation, he gave a speech and he threw out his prepared remarks and started going on an anti-Israel diatribe. And it was met by whoops and cheers from the audience. And that sort of perked me up. And then when I was writing this article, I decided to take another look into Arthur Butts. And frankly, well, he had come out as a neo-Nazi when I was a student, but I'd never really seriously read what he wrote. And so I jumped into the rabbit hole and I actually read what he wrote. And I read The Hoax of the 20th Century, which I don't recommend to anybody. It's like jumping in a cesspool without goggles on. But it is, he claims he's fine with Jews. He likes to even cite a Jew or two who are agree that with him, which is strange and I didn't expect it, but it's a analog to what goes on the far left with JVP. He doesn't mind Jews. Jews are okay. At heart, he's an anti-Zionist. Zionists bamboozled the world into believing there was a Holocaust. And that was news to me. So that when I started to read his anti-Zionist, what he was talking about in terms of his theories of, if you will, of anti-Zionism, it struck me, boy, this sounds like a lot like Professor Thrasher. And then the more I dug, and this is one of the themes in the book, is that the anti-Zionism of the far right and of the far left, they literally somehow say the same thing. And if you give me one more second, I know I'm going on a little bit here, but you mentioned University of Illinois, and there was Stephen Saleda. Stephen Saleda is on the far left. What does he write? He wrote, I'm quoting, it's in my book, the Nazi Holocaust in Europe seems a direct antecedent to Israel's founding. There were plans from the outset of Zionism to rid the promised land of its indigenous population. That's almost exactly what Arthur Butts says.
And so if I take the example of Northwestern, is it really something that I can generalize to almost every other university campus in America?
Well, here's the thing. So I did the research and I found other conspiracy theories advocates at Northwestern University too, which shocked me because I did think Northwestern had maintained academic standards, but it's all over. Professor Jasper Puar is a full professor at Rutgers and is this year a visiting professor at the University of Chicago with a prestigious post for this year, in which, among other things, she claims that the reason that Israelis, Jews, Zionists provide medical care to Palestinians, to people in disaster zones and the like, which is we're well aware of and I think proud of, is because they're Jews. So they can't really be trying to do something good. Rather, they're harvesting organs and they're using them for their evil, mendacious purposes. And she gets into theories of greenwashing and not greenwashing, pinkwashing. One theory becomes more absurd than the other. Her book was published by Duke University Press, which should have turned it on just based on a Google check of facts, and won the most prestigious book award that the Women's Studies Association has to give. So this has become endemic in universities, and I show some other examples all across the country. But I was shocked at Northwestern University. I have 2 degrees from Northwestern. I consider myself I consider myself a loyal alum, and to read what is passing for scholarship there is remarkable. And one other thing. There was a book published by a Northwestern professor that you can't even understand unless you sign on to the conspiracy theory. And yet that was published by Stanford University Press.
And when we talk about conspiracy theories, it takes something that just makes absolutely no sense, and we continue to explain everything by no sense. You've come to in a conspiracy, you come to the conclusion, and you have to figure out how you get from where you are to that conclusion and leave all facts aside. Is that how you would define a conspiracy?
So here's the thing that people don't get, is that there can be theories about a conspiracy, and that's good scholarship, good journalism, good critical thinking. Let me take a current example. Let's say that you have a theory that the Wuhan virology lab accidentally or purposely leaked the COVID-19 virus. Well, the thing to do is to investigate, send investigators in, do look at the facts without a bias, and then figure out whether you have enough evidence to think that, yes, this happened, or no, it didn't happen, or come to the conclusion that we can't make a conclusion. We just don't have enough facts. How that differs from a conspiracy theory is, let's take Arthur Butts. So he says the Holocaust didn't happen. Well, he has to expand his theory around facts, which the far left does as well. So confronted by tens of thousands of documents, which he acknowledges in his book, that show the planning, execution of the murder of 6 million Jews, and confronted with in his own book, with documentation of Nazis of Germans who confessed to being murderers, confessed to being guards, confessed to being witnesses, confessed to being perpetrators of all types. So he expands the theory around it. He says that this evil moneyed cabal of Zionists planted documents all across Europe to be accidentally found by investigators. That's how clever they were. And he talks about how pure, innocent, hapless Nazis were bamboozled, to use his word, to confessing to crimes against humanity that would have never entered their minds. So his theory becomes non-falsifiable, because any fact, no matter how blatant, just the theory expands around it and says that's extra proof of just how evil this moneyed cabal is. And by the way, identically, and this is the thing that I show time and time again, you've read the book from the far left and the far right, is I show the exact same thinking going on the far right, or lack of thinking, where, and I actually show how these theories on the far left are barely warmed over theories from the Soviets and the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. And now with archives, we know that the people writing it knew that they were making it up and were trying to make stuff up. It's like the birds. There are no birds in the world. Well, the Soviets were very successful because people have clearly signed on to that when it comes to Zionism.
And have you had a reaction from the right or the left to the book?
So there's definitely been reactions. There's no question about it, but not from the university at this point, because they are attempting to ignore it, which has been their pattern. I actually talk about that in the book. It's been a successful PR strategy to sort of let things just float away and let the news cycle pass.
And in terms of the next steps, you've written the book. You are everywhere. If you do a quick Google search on Scott Shay, you will find both Scott's own website, which has a lot of resources and other links to other pieces of information, also how to get the book. But you'll also be finding so many places that Scott has spoken. Have places refused to hear your findings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into names, but what the problem is that we're living in an echo chamber today where there's some people that will adamantly refuse to hear anything that doesn't agree with their preconceived notions. I mean, we've had this conversation before too, privately, which is, I think we've unfortunately, and I think this is what the Bible tries to teach us not to do. We're supposed to engage. Even, the most famous line in the Bible probably is "V'ahavta karecha kamocha," and then, but the pasuk before that says you should engage, rebuke your fellow, because you know what? If someone's doing something you disagree with, you're not supposed to just ignore them or cancel them. You're supposed to engage them, whether you like it or not. And these days, people don't want to do that. So it's a serious problem. And it's a problem that's being exacerbated by universities. That's one of the problems that I talk about in academia, is that, especially when it comes to anti-Zionism, there are whole departments that you cannot even enter if you have a pro-Zionist or pro-Israel view in any way. Or if you're a Jew, let's even make it sharper. If you're a Jew and you don't loudly disavow any affinity towards Israel, and don't immediately recognize that it's a settler, colonialist, imperialist, white supremacist state that was illegitimately born. Unless you do that, and you're Jewish, you don't even bother applying to the anthropology department for graduate studies at Northwestern. Don't even waste the electricity for the application.
So this is obviously very, very frightening, but is there some way of looking forward and seeing some bright light, or are we in for a generation that's being raised and educated with these kinds of conspiracies?
Well, Rabbi Matenki, that's why I wrote the book and why I took all my discretionary free time for 20 months writing the book, is because I think if we stay on autopilot, the answer is it's not good. I mean, I use the sort of notion that we're the canaries in the coal mine. Well, it's bad for the canary because the canary dies, but it's also bad for the coal miners because they end up dying too. And I'm really worried about the future of civil society. I think we as the Jewish community have, I would say we have a responsibility to ourselves, but we have a responsibility to the greater community to point this out, because universities have no longer become places of learning how to critically think. They become, unfortunately, they've rebranded themselves as social justice movements. And that could be okay as long as you continue to critically think. I mean, I talk about in the book, I recount one professor that I knew pretty well at the time, and she was an Advent feminist. She was, I think, a second wave feminist. And, but she could argue the other side of the point extraordinarily convincingly. And that, frankly, I think she thought it was going to sharpen her, it was sharpening her own feelings, but that's okay. She would engage. Now, if you attempt to engage, you are evil. And particularly when it comes to Israel, which is the evil of evils in many far left circles. And I show a Thrasher, I show the tweets of Thrasher. I show, look, there's a professor at Northwestern University who compares Hassan Nasrallah to Nelson Mandela, to Gandhi, who I mentioned before. I don't know whether before this broadcast or on it, but what other group? I don't need to refresh. Well, maybe I do, but your listeners and viewers, that Hassan Nasrallah believes that every Jew on the planet should be murdered, and that it's a responsibility to murder every Jew. So this is someone who sounds just like Hitler from that perspective, but yet there's a professor who can advocate for him at Northwestern University and nobody says boo. It's not just even anti-Semitism, that is hate speech. And yet he's been promoted, keeps getting promoted up.
Where did it start from? Is this the success of the anti-Israel Arab countries? Or is this something that's happening culturally that has found the canary, the Jewish community, and Zionism?
Well, I go through the history of how this really has flourished. That's a long conversation for the book too. I'll give you, but as you know, I think that a lot of this started in the 70s in terms of really flourishing, but the anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism really, I show how Mein Kampf, again, I really don't recommend anybody read these books. They're terrible books and totally disheartening. You feel like you need to take a shower when you're done. And the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, what Vladimir Lenin wrote, what Stalin wrote and executed. These are really, what's going on campus are just warmed over theories of Nazis and warmed over theories of the Soviets. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, I'm going to see if I can find something real quick, because there's one thing that here I found him. This is from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. This sounds like it could have been written just on campus today. The main posits of modern Zionists are militant chauvinism, racism, and anti-communism. The anti-human reactionary essence of Zionism is an overt and covert fight against freedom and freedom movements. International Zionist organizations own major financial funds, partly through Jewish monopolists, partly collected by Jewish mandatory charities. It also influences or controls significant parts of the media and outlets and controls the West. It serves as the front squad of colonialism and neo-colonialism and actively participates in the fight against the national liberation movements of the people, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. That could be written yesterday, except it was written in the early 50s by people who knew they were making it up.
And you sent your children to universities and
Yeah.
they flourished. Some of them have been
Yes.
at Northwestern as well.
Yes,
What
no
is
question.
what does a parent do nowadays? I'm sharing this with with students and with parents at Ida Crown, and when they get this and they read it, most people would say, I don't want to go there, but I have to go there. What do we do? I'm just a bit at a loss, because the individual will continue to attend the university. If you can create a movement, we are far down the path of being able to resolve this. What advice would you give to a parent today?
So my advice to the parent would be, this shouldn't be something you put on your students, on your children. There's a power dynamic at universities where the professors give the grades, they give the recommendations. There are in cases where people haven't given recommendations for Jewish students to attend Israeli universities. And there is also social pressure. So I think a lot of Jews on campus keep their head down already. In the university at NYU, if you're affiliated with a Jewish organization, you can't be affiliated with a progressive group. Same things happening at University of California. But, and here's the important thing, the major role should be taken by the adults, not the young adults, but the full adults, because donations, taxpayer dollars, I mean, University of Illinois, which we briefly touched upon, is supported by the taxpayer dollars of probably most people listening to this broadcast and podcast. That's why I wrote the book, because a lot of people wave their hands at this. You know, universities, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. What I want to do is say, here are the quotes. Here's what they're actually saying in their own words. Here's a footnote. You can go check it. And so I think adults need to speak to their legislators and say, you know, college funding shouldn't be for this. Even Northwestern, University of Chicago also get funding from the state, from taxpayers. And I have to say this, I've personally spoken to trustees of various universities who are Jewish, and they while they recognize their issues, they haven't been prepared to act or do anything or say anything. And I think we need to change that. We don't have knighthoods in the United States, so being on a university board is as close as people can get. And people are like it a lot, and it's very prestigious. And I think people who are not just Jewish, I actually have found more residents from non-Jews, frankly, who are trustees, to engage in these issues. And that says something, unfortunately, about the Jewish community today, sadly. Maybe it's time for an update of getting our groove back.
And I think that was his first book, for those who don't know the reference, which really started Scott on this path of being an author and having an impact through the written word, which he has done so magnificently. So in your role in Jewish community today, you were very, very involved in the Federation in New York.
Yep.
You've been involved in many, many organizations. Is this your new passion, to try to bring people together to try to fight this, the organized Jewish community as well?
Yes, well, look, I'm an over-involved Jew. There's no question about that. I think I learned that at the academy, where I also learned to write. I was editor of the student newspaper, as you may or may not recall from
the Academic Rep.
Yeah. So I'm a proud alum of Ida Crown as well. This has become a passion, because I'm worried that this impacts not just the Jewish community, but broader. I'm also worried that these are just blood libels remade, and to start stealing the notion of the indigeneity of the Jewish people to the land of Israel goes at the core of our beliefs. You may believe in a 1-state solution, 2-state solution, 3-state solution, I don't care, 12-state solution, or no state solution. We should just all be, one people in the world. But to question the indigeneity of the Jewish people, and our texts show it, but even if you're a total disbeliever, there's the Menepa to steal. We have, as Jews, a 3,000-year connection that's documented to the land of Israel. And so what people are doing is history denial. And that goes back to what I was talking about in terms of conspiracy theories. So things become non-falsifiable. And if we start all going down that route, it is really bad for the Jews, period, full stop.
No, we found that even about whether or not, and the Palestinian authorities have said this, whether or not there was a Beit HaMikdash on the Temple Mount. There never was, and all of a sudden you could explain everything away. And conspiracy theories are really driving much of what we find in the political conversation today in the United States as well. What language you're going to use about what happened in Washington in January, whether it was a riot or an insurgency, and then the different positions, the different facts are shaped to support that language itself. In terms of the book, how's the sales have been?
Pretty good, actually. So it's available on Amazon and at barnesandnoble.com and anywhere where quality books are sold. It's part of the Simon & Schuster catalog, so it's easy to get. And people are engaging with it. It's not a hard, I mean, it's a smaller book than In Good Faith. So that was the number one criticism of In Good Faith. People said it was a great book. It did very well, but they said it should have been, you needed to make it 2 books. So this time I disappointed myself. Lots came out, and and thank God thank God people are paying attention to it.
And
not at the university, though, not at Northwestern. They're studiously ignoring
well,
it.
no, in many universities, and as you were speaking about what's been going on in universities with conspiracies, some of those crazy same thoughts about colonialism and apartheid, you'll even hear within Israel, in some of the universities in Israel. And it's frightening because it's become the nature of academia, in some ways, to accept things without questioning it enough.
It's a problem. And I mean, we can have a long discussion about the universities in Israel. But having said that, the problem is parsecs worse here in the United States.
Yes,
I mean, there are outliers in Israel, but there's not the same problem as there are. Look, the leader of the BDS movement, Omar Bugatti, got his graduate degree at Tel Aviv University, which shows you that personally, obviously, didn't care if the boycott. He
Yes.
cared. He ignored the boycott when it had a personal impact. But he's a guy that believes there should be no Jewish state from the river to the sea. Having said that, and I've spent some time looking at the data, it's nowhere near, I mean, the same situation in Israel. There's still, even among the far left, there's a consensus that Jews are indigenous, and it's the rare person. But here's the thing to remember, and I mentioned this in the book. There are people who are Jews who are Holocaust deniers. Moshe Arya Friedman famously who calls himself, without corroboration, a rabbi. And others who claim to be humanizers of Hitler, and I cite some of their names. There are always going to be some crazy outliers, but not the bulk.
And this, I think, is part of your point in the book, that unfortunately, what has crept into mainstream academia in the United States are things that once upon a time we thought were just the crazies who would say such things. And the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic statements can creep into courses that have nothing to do with Israel or anti-Semitism. It's
for sure. And Israel is used in some cases as the baseline of evil. I mean, that's what I really show in the book too, that the whole departments that have signed on to anti-Israelism, how anti-Israelism has been linked to the LGBTQ plus movement. And these have been hijackings. I mean, just remarkable how they have been hijackings of otherwise important movements. And I have to say, if Yasser Arafat, and I show this in the book, he was a PR genius. He came up with some of this early linkage of Palestinian nationalism to most of the far left movements, and he did a good job. That was probably his greatest success.
No, and it continues. It even continues in silly areas. Just last week, the news of the Miss Universe beauty pageant in Eilat and the boycotts that were taking place there, and people who were condemning, and it was just bizarre. Scott, our time is up, believe it or not. I really appreciate this, but I have to thank you because the book is a fascinating read. If anyone gets it, well, everyone should get it. But when you get it and you read it, you'll see it reads, it's very easy. It was a Shabbat afternoon reading for me to be able to go through the book. It is wonderful. It is filled with information, and it's critical for us to know because we need to be informed of what's happening and hopefully from there take the next step to take action. It's available, as Scott mentioned, everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I got my first copy on Amazon, but it's also available if you go to scottshay.com as well. You'll be able to see everything there. And you're also living proof, Scott, that a person can enter the world of business and make a difference in the Jewish world and the world at large as well. One of the most successful people in business I know, and at the same time, one of the most successful Jews that I know as well. So thank you so very much, Scott, and have a wonderful rest of your day and continue to change our world for good.
Thank you. And again, thank you for those kind words.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day.